Dr. Stanton Glantz is one of the pioneers in the fight against tobacco. He's a courageous man. He's written with a very pointed pen on the issues for many years. We're delighted to have him as our guest this morning. And we do so because he's one of two authors of a new report in today's issue of Circulation that takes another look at some of the past tactics of the tobacco companies. Welcome to the program, Stan, and tell us a little bit about this latest effort.
Well, when people have thought about smoking and passive smoking, they've mostly thought about lung cancer. But in fact, smoking causes a tremendous number of heart attacks, and 80% of the deaths due to secondhand smoker because of heart disease. So we looked at the previously secret tobacco industry documents to see what the tobacco companies have been doing to try to undermine public appreciation for the dangers of secondhand smoke and heart disease. And what we found is that they've had a decades-long effort to seek out and fund nominally independent scientists who would do studies that were set up in such a way as to show that there's no effect of secondhand smoke and heart disease. When one of them actually performed the study properly and showed that very low levels of secondhand smoke increased atherosclerosis, they cut him off financially and attacked him. And more recently, they've been trying to create what I would call an alternative literature to support their claims that they can make cigarettes that aren't dangerous.
Now, it seems to me that we've heard much of this before, that is, that they will resort to these kinds of tactics.
Right.
What surprised you about this particular report that you've come out with? That is, what you found in this particular investigation.
Well, there are two things that are new in this paper. The first thing is they did the same kinds of things with heart disease as they did lung cancer. You're absolutely right in that the kind of tactics that they applied to slow down the scientific evidence and to confuse people about lung cancer were simply repeated here for heart disease. But the fact is, no one knew about that up until now. And then the second thing which is new and which is just emerging is using very similar techniques to try to develop a scientific literature that they can then turn around and use when the FDA gets authority to regulate cigarettes to claim that somehow they're making cigarettes that aren't as dangerous. And this is very pernicious because the tobacco companies are one of the main agencies supporting this kind of research, and then, you know, sooner or later the FDA is going to get authority over cigarettes, and they're going to be able to use the same kind of carefully selected and biased research to go to the FDA and try to get the FDA to certify some new product as safer when it may not be.
Now, when and if the FDA does in fact take control over nicotine, I'm presuming they're going to proceed in the way they usually do with so-called independent advisory panels that will vote on issues. Do you think that the tobacco industry can really hoodwink these panels and get to the FDA with bad rulings?
Well, yeah, I think that's what they're trying to set up here, because basically, and this is something they've used in other areas too, they're trying to create a cadre of so-called independent experts that are going to be very, friendly to the tobacco companies. And one of the big criticisms of a lot of the FDA panels is that they've often included people who are funded by drug companies to do research on the very drug that they're evaluating. Well, the drug companies don't hold a candle to the cigarette companies when it comes to manipulating science.
Is there anybody in the tobacco industry, broadly conceived, that you think, and anybody, any company, any organization that is trying to do the right thing, or are they all pretty much as you've described them?
Well, I mean, the tobacco companies are businesses who are in the business of selling cigarettes, and they're not going to do anything that's going to reduce the sale of cigarettes. If their management did, their stockholders should fire them.
I should mention at this point, by the way, that the tobacco companies weren't invited to participate in this. They declined the interview, said they had no comment. I suppose that's pretty par for the course in this kind of public discourse, which you...
Well, it is, but the interesting thing is that Philip Morris, which is pushing the current FDA bill, which I think it's a mistake that a lot of health groups are supporting that specific piece of legislation. But Philip Morris is the one who is doing funding this new work around so-called reduced exposure products that we talk about in the paper. And if the whole thing was, above board and defendable, one would have thought they would have wanted to come on television and demonstrate how we're just full of hot air in what we've written. I think the fact that they wouldn't come out really shows that there's something kind of slimy going on here.
Well, as I said at the beginning, you've been an absolute pioneer in this effort, so I want to ask a kind of closing historical perspective question. Despite all of the Machiavellian efforts of the tobacco companies, smoking is dropping, at least in this country, among men primarily. So we've had some success with counter efforts, but give us some sense of the worldwide scene, which is worse than ever as far as I can tell.
Yes, well, first of all, you're absolutely right. There's been remarkable progress, and in fact, the big news yesterday was the rapid and increasingly rapid drop in cancer, and virtually the entire drop in lung cancer is because of people quitting smoking or not starting. And in fact, we've done other research showing that the benefits, even for lung cancer, start to occur within a year or so, much faster than anyone else had previously thought. The international scene, I would say, is mixed. The tobacco companies are aggressively expanding overseas, particularly in the former Soviet Union and in Asia. But at the same time, the world has really united against the tobacco industry. About 3 years ago, something called the Framework Convention for Tobacco Control, kind of a Kyoto Accords of Tobacco, was signed. It's in force now. Over 150 countries have ratified it, of course not including the United States, which fought it tooth and nail. But it's actually, I have to say, I was sort of a skeptic of it initially, but it's making a big difference. Many countries, especially in the developing world, that had never really thought about tobacco are now engaging the issue. The WHO is putting out very aggressive policy guides in the area. I've helped write some of them, and they're very good. And Michael Bloomberg, the mayor of New York City, has put $125 million of his own money into supporting international tobacco control efforts in developing countries.
Stan, I'm going to have to jump in on that note because we've run out of time.
That's it.
I do want to take 10 seconds to personally congratulate you and thank you for all your efforts, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you.